Madam President, this shouldn't be a hard issue. I have a letter here I'd like to submit for the record. This is a letter led by Senator Collins and Senator Coons, April 7th, 2017, to the then Majority Leader, Senator McConnell, and Democratic Leader, Senator Schumer. Over 60 senators, the majority of Republicans and the majority of Democrats in the U.S. Senate, sent this letter to the then leadership of the Senate saying, in essence, don't change the legislative filibuster. Now, a bunch of Democrats and a bunch of Republicans, I was going to read the names, but they know who they are. The majority on both sides, for both parties in this body, in 2017 said, don't change it. This shouldn't be something that the U.S. Senate changes. And part of the reason this was going on is because at the time, then President Trump was pressing senators, particularly Majority Leader McConnell at the time, to change the filibuster. Filibuster requires 60 votes to move legislation in the Senate. It requires compromise. It requires bipartisanship. It's what makes us different from the House. So at the time, the then Republican President Trump was saying, change it. I want legislation to move more quickly. Republicans, the Majority Leader, then Majority Leader McConnell, said that's not a good idea. Matter of fact, most of us said that was not a good idea. So we didn't do anything. We didn't change it because we didn't want to change the nature of the United States Senate. So, Madam President, this is one of the issues being discussed right now, but it shouldn't be a difficult issue because, as I said, the vast majority of the senators in this body a couple of years ago said, don't do it. We don't want the Senate to just become a smaller version of the House, because that's what would happen if you got rid of the legislative filibuster. So I do want to extend my congratulations to the new Majority Leader, as of yesterday, Senator Schumer. But to the new Majority Leader, this should not be a difficult issue. This should not be something that we're having a problem in terms of the negotiations between Democrats and Republicans that is delaying the power sharing agreement. This should be a piece of cake. The vast majority of Democrats and Republicans just a couple years ago said, don't change the legislative filibuster. And we want to make sure that remains the case. And I think for the new Majority Leader, this would be an act of statesmanship, an act of compromise, and certainly a statement that he is going to keep the Senate the same as it's been for decades, for centuries. Because changing the legislative filibuster would change the entire structure, history, precedent of this very important body in our country. So, shouldn't be hard. The vast majority of Democrats and Republicans have already agreed to this. So to our new Majority Leader, do what you know is right. An act of statesmanship, compromise, we've all been talking about it. And this should not be a difficult decision, particularly given that so many senators on both sides of the aisle feel strongly enough to have written Senator Schumer and Senator McConnell just a couple years ago on this. So to all my colleagues who signed that letter, you know who you are. Make sure you're pressing the new Majority Leader to stick to what you pressed him on just a couple years ago. Important. Madam President, I also want to talk about another important issue, and that is President Biden's nomination for the very important job of Secretary of Defense, Mr. Lloyd Austin. We're going to be voting on his nomination here on the Senate floor in a couple hours. And I had the honor of introducing Mr. Austin just 2 days ago at his confirmation hearing. And I thought the confirmation hearing went well. So I want to talk a little bit about Mr. Austin before we take what are essentially going to be two important votes for his confirmation. Now, the last time I was actually on the floor of the United States Senate, our Capitol was under siege. And from a foreign policy and national security perspective, America's authoritarian rivals have been gloating over what happened on that day, have been reveling in our disunity. Democracy brings chaos, they tell their people. Better to have a strong hand that keeps order. Well, Madam President, as you know, we do live in an imperfect democracy, no doubt. And the American I was honored to introduce at the Armed Services hearing the other day, Mr. Lloyd Austin, understands our imperfections more than many. But on closer inspection, the world's dictators have little to celebrate. Congress went back to work on January 6th, right here on the Senate floor to count electoral votes. Yesterday, there was a peaceful transfer of power at the top of our government, as there has been since our republic's founding. And at some point, maybe sooner than we think, Chinese and Russian citizens are going to ask, hey, why can't we do that? Why don't we have strong, resilient institutions that ensure the regular election of new leaders and vest self-government in the people? And when these citizens ask these questions of authoritarians like Putin or Xi Jinping, they're not going to be gloating anymore because they don't have answers to these questions. So what does this all have to do with Mr. Lloyd Austin? A lot. Mr. Austin has been nominated to lead one of America's most trusted institutions, the Department of Defense. Many of us have worked hard over the last few years to rebuild our military strength and readiness, but I think we can all agree that there's been too much turmoil at the top of the Pentagon. As its civilian leader, I am confident that Mr. Austin will bring steadiness, leadership, and respect to this indispensable American institution. Now, I got to know Mr. Austin in 2005 and 2006. Serving together in an Army-heavy combatant command, conducting combat operations throughout the Middle East, we had what might be referred today as an unequal power relationship. He was a two-star general, I was a major. He had spent years on active duty, I was a reservist. He was a soldier, I was a Marine. I was just one of hundreds of field-grade infantry officers recalled to active duty, deployed in the region during a challenging time for our nation. But when I asked for his time, Mr. Austin gave it. When I had a problem, he listened. And when I asked for help on an important mission, he provided it. A critical hallmark of exceptional leadership, especially for organizations like the Pentagon, is not just how one treats subordinates. Let me back that up. Not just how one treats superiors, but how one treats subordinates, those down the chain of command. And what I saw was respect and integrity and someone who knows how to get things done in a difficult environment. It is clear to me the core principles of Mr. Austin's life have been duty, honor, country. West Point has done its job. Now, that may sound quaint to some, but I think having individuals of impeccable character at the top of our government is more important than ever. Other than integrity, there's no singular requirement for the difficult job of Secretary of Defense. But as the former director of the Joint Staff and as the former CENTCOM commander, Mr. Austin certainly has insights on critical issues such as interagency budget battles, working with allies, and congressional oversight. Mr. Austin is also fully committed to the constitutional principle of civilian control of our military, something that those who serve in uniform typically understand and revere more than those who don't. In that regard, Madam President, you may recall we had a hearing on the Armed Services Committee about 10 days ago on this very important topic, but I actually thought some of the witnesses had a rather simplistic view of this important issue. They had brought up topics and discussions of so-called, quote, military logic by those who wear the uniform versus political logic for those who don't wear the uniform. So let me play devil's advocate for those who participated and watched that hearing. The very nature of the confirmation hearing that we had with Mr. Austin just 2 days ago, and indeed the very nature of the transfer of power that we saw yesterday here at the Capitol, is evidence, in my view, that civilian control of the military is not at risk in America. I actually believe the related but opposite problem should be of more concern today, at this moment. And that problem is no military experience in the top ranks of our government. With the exception of Mr. Austin, no nominee on the incoming Biden administration's national security team has ever served in uniform. With regard to the entire Biden cabinet, only one other nominee has any military experience at all. This is not wise. If confirmed, I'm sure I won't agree with all of Mr. Austin's decisions. But when the inevitable budget battles occur, it will be critical for our nation's security and, very importantly, the military members and their families who serve to have a Secretary of Defense who understands firsthand the very real morale and readiness problems that result from drastic cuts to our military. Something, unfortunately, I think many of my colleagues here in the Senate will be pushing for, and even members of the Biden administration will be pushing for. So let me conclude with this. Right now, a number of us are interviewing cabinet members for confirmation for the incoming Biden administration. I anticipate opposing some, supporting others. Certainly, I'll be anticipating opposing some if I believe they will hurt the working families of my state. But with regard to Mr. Austin, I am fully supporting his nomination. We are living through difficult times, a pandemic, racial tensions, riots, turmoil at the top of the Pentagon, and rising dangers from China, Russia, and Iran. Mr. Austin's confirmation won't solve all of these problems, but it will help. He represents the best of America, a man of integrity, humility, and character with a wealth of relevant experience. Our allies will take comfort in his confirmation, and our adversaries will take pause. And as America's first African-American Secretary of Defense, he will be an inspiration to millions, both in and out of uniform. And for all these reasons, Madam President, I strongly urge my colleagues to support Mr. Austin's confirmation and the waiver in federal law that it requires. I yield the floor.